for this evening with Joy Richardson. Joy will be talking to us about her role in Steve McQueen's third movie of the mini-series, Red, White and Blue, which was screened last night. I'm thrilled to have watched this, and I hope everyone joining today has had an opportunity to watch it. It's around the life of Leroy Logan, and traces his trajectory from being a scientist to being a police officer with the Met. Joy is playing the role of Mrs. Logan, Leroy Logan's mother, and we saw her last night, and I'm thrilled to be talking to her about her role and her experience in working with Steve McQueen and on Small Axe. Now, Joy needs no introduction to the Kellogg community. She is an acclaimed artist and creator and actor, but for us dearly, Joy is a Kellogg alumna, and she's contributed so much to Kellogg over the years. I'm new to Kellogg, but I've known about Joy's contribution, and we're so grateful, Joy, for you to have made time the day after the screening to be talking to us. So thank you so much for joining today. And before we hear from Joy, and I'll give the floor to her in just a moment, I just want to say one thing. We hope for this to be a conversation. So Joy will be speaking to us about her experience first, but we'll be so happy to take questions from you. So if you have a question, it'd be great if you could put the question in the Q&A box on Zoom here now, instead of now posting on either Twitter or Slido. So if you have a question, post here or repost here in the Q&A box, and we'd be so happy to take your questions. But without further ado, may I please invite Joy to share her experience with us, and I invite everyone to hear in, but also to post questions so we can take them later on. Joy, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. My camera's switched off from the host, I think.
Shabas, I think you might have to turn on Joy's camera as well. There you are, we can see you.
There I am. Lovely to see you all. Thank you, Shreya. Thank you, Shabazz, and thank you everyone for attending this talk. It's really lovely to be able to connect with Kellogg College again. We've been incredibly supportive, but also at this time of isolation, I do feel at times very far away from the world and from the Kellogg community. So I'm delighted that so many of you have joined me today in what I hope will be a fun and interesting discussion and sharing of my experience doing Red, White and Blue, the Small Axe project. I thought maybe I'd give a broader picture of the project and then move into the more particular and personal experience which I had. So Small Axe, as some of you know, comes from a Caribbean saying, which is that if you are a small axe, no, if you are a big tree, we are the small axe. So no matter how big the challenge is, the institution, whatever you're facing, a small axe can cut down a small tree. So with intention, you can make a difference. It's all about making a difference in a positive way. Funnily, when I first heard about the project, I was very excited because I had never come across a story being told about the contribution of the Caribbean community as the prime aspect of any storytelling on television or on film. And then I read that Steve McQueen said that he started the project 10 years ago in his mind when he just thought, isn't it weird that the Caribbean community have been here in this country for so long, and yet their stories, their history, the contribution is invisible, virtually invisible, and that the Caribbean community on television and film support other stories. And that's when the project started, and it was supposed to be just one film. But then there were so many important stories that he narrowed it down. I think this is actually a 5-film project. So when my agent contacted me, this must have been last year around no, it would have been about July. And they sent me the script and said, you know, normally what happens is they send you a bit of the script and then you memorize it and then you have someone film it in your home. Then you send off what's called a self-tape, as some of you know, and then the director and the casting director look at it. So I worked so hard on my self-tape. I telephoned my nephew, who is about 23 years old, and I said to him, please come round and help me, because there's so many little bits to my character, Mrs. Logan. I can't find a through line. So he spent a couple of hours with me, just sitting down, and we were discussing the themes, discussing the choices, what she felt, what was happening at that time, because I also saw it as an opportunity to teach him about history in a kind of an underhand way, just, you know, saying, yeah, well, this happened and that happened, and what do you think of that? And it was an incredible experience for both of us, because through that audition, through that story, we connected in a different way, which is why our own personal history, which we'd never really done before. So it was important in that sense. And then there's a scene, I won't give too much away about the film because I know some of you may not have seen it, but there's a scene where they're playing Scrabble and I have about 3 lines, and my nephew and I just played a bananagram, a similar version of Scrabble, so that when I auditioned for it, I would have the feel and the energy of that game. And then I sent off the self-tape and they liked it and they called me in to meet Steve McQueen. And then the audition began. And he said, what do you have? And I had all these little bits of scenes which I'd memorized, and I chose the Scrabble scene. And it was an improvisation with somebody else, and it went on and on and on. So it just goes to show that you have to take a leap of faith with so many things, especially when it comes to acting, because you don't know what is around the corner or what you're going to be asked to do. And I was so grateful that I got this job. Another aspect of it, of course, is that I am Guyanese. I'm not Jamaican, and the Logan family are Jamaican, but it's still our stories. So I had to work on the Jamaican accent. And one of the things I do sometimes when I really get stuck is I approach a stranger, because I have great confidence in the kindness of strangers. Throughout my life and my mother's life and in Kellogg College, I have been helped by total strangers if I've asked for it, or somebody's just noticed that I need help. And I remember on this particular occasion, before the actual audition, I was walking along the high street and I overheard a very strong Jamaican accent. And I approached the person, I said, hello, I said, I've got to, I wonder whether you can help me. I have a audition coming up and I need to do a Jamaican accent and I'm Guyanese. And the person said, yeah, sure. And then on the street, on the corner, they worked with me on that Jamaican accent. And then I was able to have that little bit more confidence to do it. Now, just to quickly tell you a little bit about Red, White and Blue and the whole project. It's a project of 5 films and they're set in the 60s, 70s and 80s. It's produced by Turbine Studios, BBC Studios and Amazon Studios. And Steve McQueen said when asked, why did it take him such a long time to make these films and to have this project come to fruition? And he said, because it's only now that he feels he had the maturity to tell these stories. Having made the film Hunger, which is about the Irish hunger strike in 1981, another film about sex addiction, and now he's got his Academy Award for 12 Years a Slave, and also his OBE and the Turner Prize. And only now he felt that he could tell those stories because he wanted to tell it with a confident voice, but also his own truth. And one of the special things about working with him is we were allowed to bring our own truth into the story. So he would say, well, what is your experience? Find something that connects you to this bit, and you can change the lines. And if it works, it works. Otherwise, we can always find something else. But that kind of freedom I'd known in theatre, but not in film, not on television. And there's a little scene where they're seated around the dinner table, and one of the characters, is a very tense situation. And one of the characters is talking about putting sugar, how she puts sugar to make her chicken a little bit sweet. And my character, Mrs. Logan, who's eating the food and enjoying it, says, I never use sugar. That was an improvised line because Steve McQueen had said, what happens in these situations where there's tension? And I'd said there's often competition in my family, a little bit, when it comes to cooking and sharing of recipes or holding back recipes. But that kind of detail, I think, is what was very important in the film. And Shabazz and I were talking about the outer world, the physical world, the things that you recognize. So sitting on the set, which is basically someone's house, I recognized furniture, I recognized wallpaper, I recognized object that took me straight back to a time when I was struggling with these same issues of discrimination or fear of the police. You know, you didn't have to do anything, and you're fighting for your brothers or your father, or, you know, so it really just placed it at the heart of my memories. And on set, we could share stories of those memories. And another thing was that there was a lot of tears on set and laughter, because it does trigger things. And Steve McQueen has said, just keep it real. These are people's lives that people are living now. Somewhere in the world, everywhere, people are going through this kind of thing, the laughter, the pain. So keep it real, don't act it. Just think and feel, and then be honest. And we could do the scene again and again and again until that happened. And so when I would go back to my hotel room, it would stay with me in my head and in my heart. And I filmed over a period of 3 weeks. And each time I would come home, I would speak to my mother about it and family, and more stories would come up. And I'm just saying this just to say that Kellogg College, I'm really thankful to you for allowing me to share this, because as I speak to people, whatever part of the world you're from, whatever your history is, we all have some kind of family stories. And the Small Act series is ultimately about family and about community. And a sad thing is that this history is being lost. When you think that these stories haven't been told before, and the generation that they're talking about are dying, they're of a certain age, but also feeling that the stories don't really matter. They're watching other people's stories and admiring that or living through it. But we are all connected. We've all had our pain. We've all dealing with what's happening now, but in our own different ways, and yet in the same way, but in a particular way. So I'm interested to hear your questions, so that I can just hear from you as well, and share a little bit deeper what my experience was as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joy. Thank you for sharing your process, your journey, your experience on Small Acts. I see there's a question from Jeffrey and John, and we're going to take them in just a moment. For others as well, please feel free to post more questions for Joy. But I'll ask something, Joy, that you've already sort of started touching on in the way that you described what was going on, the process behind some of the scenes. And I love the improvisation that you mentioned. I mean, there's such a little moment of tension there when the aunt mentions, "Oh, I always add demerara," and you're like, "I never add sugar." It's just it's such a delicious scene, and I'm so glad you mentioned it. But I have a question about the first scene in which you appear, and I ask it in the larger backdrop of Black women's lives in which this particular episode is being shown, and in the first scene in which you appear when you're in the hospital and Roy Logan walks in and looks at his father, and you exchange one look, and there's just a nod. There's just so much going on in terms of just carrying within your body all the commotion, all the drama, everything that is happening around you, and it's something which is so physical in terms of just absorbing the pain that is there, and it comes out beautifully in the way you project it. What was your brief, and how did you approach not just that part, but the role as a whole, especially as against the other women who were part of the series?
Well, first of all, as an actor, you have to do your homework, a lot of homework. And that was actually my first day on set. And I was introduced again to the director, introduced to the actors. I had my costume on, and then I just had to do the scene. So I wasn't really given any direction at that stage, because you just have to offer something before the director can then change it. So I'm sitting there in the hospital room. I'd said hello to the actor playing my husband, Steve Toussaint, and I was shocked at his face because I hadn't seen it previously. And I said, wow, that's incredible. Then I was placed in the corner, and I asked for a tissue because I just thought, I've just got to be there. Just imagine this, just make it my life, just make it real. And the more I looked at him and he looked back at me, the more that our son, Leroy, looked at us, then the deeper it actually hit me. And of course, you don't just do the scene once, because it has to be shot from different angles. So you do it again and again and again. And then you have to start in a way from the top, wipe away the tears, and then see them for the first time, see my son for the first time. And in that particular bit that was kept in the different versions, which was filmed, I remember my eyes just connecting, and the exchange just prompted, just triggered a nod. It wasn't a planned thing. It was just an acknowledgement that this is where we are. This is where our family is. And there were no words. So that was that.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate you sharing that. I do want to bring others in at this point, and I see there are two excellent questions there. I see Jeffrey's actually online, and I wonder if he would like to ask the question directly.
Yes, thank you. Thank you both. Joy, lovely to see you again.
See you,
And gosh, thank you thank you for doing the show, but also thank you for being such a brilliant Kellogg alumna, as you always are. I found it the show was the series so powerful, almost had to watch it through my fingers, because it was the stories were so awful, actually. You know, I don't know how to react. I describe it as painful, actually, and that's a compliment to you and your colleagues for making it come over so real. A few questions. I want to know if you're allowed to tell me what happened to the real Leroy, as it were, without giving anything away for those who haven't seen your Red, White, and Blue. But I also thought the women were very strong characters in supporting him. Is that a general feature, you think, of how the issues were handled?
I'll take the second question first, Jeffrey. Thank you. it's really interesting that you ask about the women's role, because in fact, other than the wife, the other two women who are of another generation to Leroy in that supportive role, they don't actually say much, but they are there very, very strong. And it is very much I have found that at the heart of a family, especially in those times, as I suppose is also the same with this country, coming to this country, it was very traditional. So the men would go out to work and the women would also work, of course, but be the center of the family, trying to negotiate all the tensions which were happening in the outside world. So if you have the world outside, which is threatening, and yet you have ambition and hope, you need a very strong center, and the woman was often that strong center, just holding it. And the second question about Leroy Logan, so he was in the police force for 30 years. It stopped there because his struggle continued. It would have been comforting to say, okay, he reached the rank of superintendent, but even as a superintendent, he was accused of claiming expenses of £80 for a hotel bill, which were false. And then when the investigation was done, in fact, he should have claimed expenses of over £600, which he didn't. So then when an investigation was carried out, they found that it was part of a larger targeting of Leroy Logan. And I think about 7 years ago or so, he was paid compensation. But there's an interview where he talks about his life. And one thing that hit me strongly is that he has hope and he feels that he can make a difference. So despite everything which was happening then, which is happening now, what he's dealing with now, and despite him saying he feels that the relationship between the police and the community, not just the Black community, but the community at large, especially the young people, have actually gone backwards. There was a time when it was moving forward, but the lack of investment, I mean, I'm only quoting what he said and what he knows about, because he has lived it, but he's still trying, he's still liaising with the youth, with the police, because he feels at the heart of it, it's the community and the police coming together that's going to actually move things forward. And yes, he has the MBBE for advancing policing, and yes, he was chief inspector, and he said that as a Black man and as a cop, trying to make changes from within the system was his dream. And he's just written a book which was released in 2020, his autobiography called Closing Ranks, My Life as a Police Officer. So he's still out there.
Good, thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Joy. Joy, I'm glad you mentioned that interview of Leroy Logan, where he mentions that we may in fact have gone backwards from the big McPherson report, which he was a part of in 1999, but also that what's striking about this particular movie, the Small Axe series, is that although it's set in 1983 and it's a textbook example of institutional racism, Leroy Logan today is talking about the fact that we haven't quite advanced from that point, and that's the part which is so shocking. I was wondering what you thought about the relevance of red, white, and blue from depicting something which is, you're right, historical, but also extremely present today, and almost the grief in that something which Leroy Logan mentions as well, that Cressida Dick's statements in 2020, when the Black Lives Matter movement is happening, that institutional racism doesn't exist, successive home secretaries sort of having brought policies which have been devastating for Black lives in the UK. So in that background, how do you see this contribution and your contribution in particular to this episode and the series in 2020?
Thank you, Shreya. One thing that struck me is that he did say at some stage, this is not a Black problem. So why should groups such as Black Lives Matter and all those have the responsibility of dealing with this? It's all of our problem, because we're losing talent, we're losing lives, we're losing our ability to come together as a community. So it's all of our issue, and we can all make a difference. I remember as a child, a young teenager, seeing the first Black policeman in my area in Hackney, and it rooted me to the spot. I had heard rumors that such a thing existed, but I'd never seen it before. And my friends and I coming home from school just stood and stared. And I remember the young policeman and his white colleague just looking at us and smiling. I couldn't even smile, I was so shocked. And then more frequently, I started to see over the years a more mixed police force. But I have to say that in Hackney, the heart, of London, really, the city is so diverse. I can't remember the last time I've seen a Black policeman. And working with the community as I do on the Tenants and Residents Association, I still don't remember seeing a Black community. So and I only realized that today because of this talk, just thinking, wait a minute, what do I know? So I think in that sense, things are moving backwards, because there's the relationship, I think, between the community used to be much stronger. The community and the police used to be much stronger in Hackney. And now there are fewer policemen on the street. So you don't really get to have a conversation. Everything has to be done online or on the phone. You can't get through. So that disconnect, I think, is part of the issue and part of the challenge. And that lack of trust, of being targeted, of being stopped. I don't know any Black men who haven't been stopped and searched, whether be they in a suit, be they, whatever their job is, be they an actor. I don't know any who haven't been stopped and searched at least once a year, whatever part of the country they are in.
Thank you, Joy. That's a poignant statement for 2020. But I think it's a good time to take John's question, who's asking whether some part of what's being shown is showing hints of colonization, and how that is not as I understand the question, is not something which sort of happens elsewhere. It's sort of brought back into the country and the community, and there are hints of that. And John's wondering if that's an accurate assessment, that's what's happening in the portrayal in your particular movie, but also largely in what's happening in Small Axe.
Right. I think it was about a year or a year and a half ago, I did a talk at Kellogg College in conversation, and it looked at the legacy of colonialism, but this time through a 3-part film I did called The Long Song. And there is a strong link here with the Small Axe project in the legacy of colonialism, mainly perception. So if you've had nearly 400 years of slavery and these ideas being put out there, they show up in films, they show up on adverts, they show up in every aspect of life. And then when the same story is told that this is your limit, this is the way you are, be it that you are violent or perceived as violent or less intelligent or over-sexualized, or when these images keep on coming, they come from somewhere, they come from the past, and they're very much in the present. So when people say slavery has nothing to do with me, colonialism has nothing to do with me, there's a big conversation that needs to be had, because that's all part of denial or lack of information. And that's where education really matters, what happens in what we're taught in schools. If we're not taught not only about Black history, but also about the contributions that people of color have made to this country in recent times as well as past times, there's this idea that the history of Black people is slavery and needing help and the starving children in Africa. And is that the whole story? I don't think so, because before slavery, there was an incredible civilization that was arrested. But lots of people don't really know that, or at least it's not at the forefront of their thought. And in schools, that is where, by making the books more representative of the world we are living in, also including disabilities, you know, people with disabilities and other groups that are excluded from being visible. And I think it's invisibility that is the legacy. Invisibility of achievement, invisibility of recognition. So the lack of plaques, the lack of statues, people do not know. It's like Hidden Figures, the film that was made several years ago, which about 3 female Black scientists who, during the time of segregation in America, were the 3 leading figures that managed to help America to win the race to, well, NASA to win the race to launch an astronaut into space. I think that is accurate, I'm not sure. But anyway, that is what the film was about. And the shock that, number one, they were the top brains in the country, mathematicians, that such a thing could happen, was jaw-dropping, whatever your race or your class or whatever, because it's a story which isn't told. And it makes me think, hopefully this is the start where we shift our perception, where the education system realizes it has a positive role to play, because it's not just about the Black community missing out, it's to do with our community, all of us missing out on understanding the world that we're living in today.
Thank you so much, Joy. It's interesting that you note that education is at the heart of it, and that message coincides with the Windrush report, which says that this isn't just an immigration issue, this is an educational issue. So go back to when education starts, integrate the history of immigration from there, and then turn the wheel. So I'm glad you drive home that point as an artist as well, which is really a role of an educator. Thank you so much. I have 2 questions here about your process. One's from Ben and one's from Sarah. Ben's happy to ask this question himself. Ben, can we have you on?
Hello, Ben.
Hello. I don't know if you can see me.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, okay. Hi, nice to see you.
Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, I'm afraid I haven't seen the one last night. I wasn't able to watch it last night, so I'm looking forward to seeing it now. But I have watched the first 2, so I sort of have a sense of what the series is like. I was fascinated by what you were saying earlier about the process of producing it. You were given a lot of freedom in improvising in the rules. That seems to be really important actually to the thing. It's not just about the stories that are being told, but the ways the stories are being told and the way that they're being produced collaboratively. And that certainly came across in the first 2. Now you say it, I can say, especially the Lovers Rock. I love that. That felt absolutely fantastic. It's just not like any kind of television I've seen before, and I think that was to do with that, you know, the role of the actors in the production of it. So, I mean, how different was the final film then from the starting script? You know, could you say a bit about that? Was the script kind of completely, was all the dialogue there, or did you depart from it, or was it just quite open, or, you know, how did that work?
It changed a lot, but the heart of it, of what was being, what the conversations were within each scene, remains. So it was the detail of the conversations. Lots of was edited out because, of course, the scripts always contain more than is possible. So if you were to film what the original script was, you'd probably have another hour and it was really shrunk down. So when I watched it last night, I had no idea what it would be like, really, because I'd only read the first script and I'd only worked on my scenes, because you're not allowed really to watch other scenes that you aren't in. The environment is too small. And so it was a surprise to me, because you never know how much of what you say is going to be kept in, and a lot of my bits were cut. I thought, no, but because they weren't driving the story through, they weren't necessary, and I understand that. But I did think to myself, oh dear, I'd love to have that part in. Oh my gosh, especially as I told all of my family, what's red, white and blue tonight, I'm in it. So it's
should send you the outtakes, so you could sort of have a compilation of your outtakes to sort of
yes, but it was still an honor, because I think that the bits that remained of the original script, although a lot changed, at the heart of it, Steve McQueen knew what he wanted, knew what he was trying to get at, what he was trying to share. And he did say that the films are not to educate people, it's not to preach, it's just to offer up the story, to give a voice to make something visible, and then let everybody make of it what they will. Yes. One thing that I will say, which is probably, which might be interesting, is that when I filmed Small Axe in November last year, I was called back in July of this year to film a new scene. And of course, the world had changed drastically. Whereas before I was in the hotels, I was meeting people, we'd greet each other with hugs. The world was free to, I was there for the touching. And when I went back, I had been in lockdown and in isolation for a few months, only stepping outside to take out the rubbish because I'm looking after my mom and all that. And so suddenly a car picks me up, everybody's masked, you go on set outside, everyone's masked, the blood, the sanitizer. It was my introduction to the world again. Having known the film crew and everybody from the time before the world changed so drastically. And so for my whole process was far more isolated. But that scene was cut.
Give you the opportunity to get out into the world anyway.
Yes, and I'm forever grateful. I saw London again, saw the world, met people again in life, real life. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Joy. Joy, could you speak a little bit more about how has this year been for you as an artist? It's been an incredibly hard year for everyone, but what does it mean to be an artist during this time in terms of, just you mentioned a bit about the process changing, but is it in terms of the lack of human contact? How do you go about preparing and keeping connected with your art, sort of chiseling it more and having some sort of contact? Does the virtual work for artists? Have you been discovering new ways of connecting? How has it been for you?
Well, the first thing is the broader context, which is that the art industry, be it theatre, art, music, has been absolutely devastated. At the best of times, artists live on the breadline. The majority of artists, you do lots of other jobs to keep going. All of that went. So there was little leeway for artists to even buy food, to put food on the table. Jobs were cancelled. I mean, this has happened across the job range, but for artists, actors, musicians, people within the theatre industry, it was so devastating. I can't put into words how devastating it was. People had a year's work cancelled. People who had no work couldn't get other work. So lots of the acting charities had to step in. And luckily for me, I have my paintings. So although I couldn't do acting anymore, I could write, because that's what I read at Kellogg College, and I was working on the project that I'm working on about the pork knockers, the men and women in Guyana who go into the jungle prospecting for gold and diamonds. And that tradition exists now. And I was working on my mom's life story, but also painting, doing a lot of painting. And that really helped, because the only way that the acting world came into my life is through being asked to do self-tape, one self-tape after another after another. And the thing with, if you're asked to do a self-tape, you have to memorize the script. Then you have to find someone who is safe enough to be outside your house. So you're filming your self-tape on the street, on the pavement, with people walking by, waiting for quiet moments, even now. And it's very exposing, but you have to, because that's the only hope. Everything is done on tape now, and maybe for a long time to come, whereas before you'd go into the casting director's office as well, mainly. But that isn't the case anymore, so it's very isolating.
Thank you, Joy. But on casting, I have a happier question from Sarah, who's asking, when you were cast, how did you celebrate when you got the news?
Well, I told my mum, first of all, because I always tell her if there's a job that I'm auditioning for and I really want, because then she's so supportive and encouraging. And I said, Mum, you remember that job that I went up for? She goes, which one? Because there's so many I go up for, which I don't get for various reasons. And then she goes, and she always says, I knew you would get it. I knew you would get it. You have to have faith, you know. And then she starts to celebrate, and she starts telling her friends. And then I would tell, and then the next person I tell is my daughter, who's living abroad in America. She's an adult now, and different times. And guess what? And everyone's so excited, because Steve McQueen has such standing and respect within not only the film industry and television, but also the art world. He's a Turner Prize winner, and his most recent project, where he photographed school children of a certain age, and the posters were all up around London, and it's just the standard school photographs, but thinking this is our future. The class of 2019. And it's a very moving exhibition. And so to be able to work with him was like, oh my gosh. And also at the audition, he was just so relaxed and just said, okay, what would you like to do? And that trust made me think, have I got it? Have I not got it? I couldn't tell. And then I just celebrated, just saying thank you. I think it's important for me to show gratitude. And I did say, thank you, universe. Thank you all who helped me. Because you never achieve these things alone.
Thank you so much, Joy. I do see there's a question from Pipa who'd like to ask in person, but before I get to her, I'm glad you mentioned your family and your daughter Maisie, who's such a wonderful actor herself. I wonder what is a regular dinner table conversation look like when you're both together? What does this intergenerational actors conversation look like? Are you talking about your craft? Or is it a bit more sort of normal conversation which the rest of us are having, or is it all artsy?
First of all, it's full of laughter. My daughter finds my mum and I very funny. I find her very funny. My mum finds her and I very funny. So it's just constant laughter and cooking. Because my mum's teaching her how to make traditional Guyanese dishes, like be it roti or pepper pot, or whatever it is. And it's just such an electric atmosphere. There's lots of hugs. It's so we missed her terribly because of what's happening now. And she's in America. It's nearly a year since my mum, well, over a year since my mum's seen her. So yeah, so and because Maisie went to Oxford as well, and I was able to support her because of the opportunity that Kellogg gave me, and she would come to Kellogg, she'd come for the lunches when she was 16, before even, you know, and going to be a student and to read archaeology and anthropology. Her introduction had been this warm welcoming from Kellogg College. And so we have that shared history as well. So if I tell her, like I told her I'm going to be doing this talk, then she was so excited because she knows what it means to me, and she has a connection as well. And then being an actor, we acted together for the first time about three years ago in a superhero. She played a superhero in Legends of Tomorrow, and by chance they were looking for someone to play her ancestor. So I auditioned with other people, and without knowing which tape was mine, they chose me to be her ancestor. So when they realized they'd actually chosen her mom, there was real celebration, and Maisie and I were just celebrating, and it was a magical experience, just the two of us acting together.
Thank you so much, Joy. We'll probably have to host another intergenerational conversation between you and Maisie to learn more about that process there. But may I invite Pippa now to ask a question?
Hi, Joy.
Hi, hello.
Hi there. I'm a teacher in a secondary school, and what you can't see is just behind me. Four members of our diversity team. We're based in Bristol, and obviously following what happened during lockdown and following the Black Lives Matters movement, the removal of Edward Colston's statue and so on, we've now created a diversity team in our school. And our idea, as you were touching on earlier, is about education. One of the things that we were wondering was, during the filming of Red, White and Blue, whether there were any scenes that you felt particularly passionate about yourself because it touched a nerve, or it linked to an experience that you had had yourself when you were younger, or whether there was any kind of personal connection. And we had a cheeky second question as well, which was about Steve McQueen's filming process, and whether you were able to offer any insight into how he gets his ideas. Thank you.
Yes, so I, of course, first of all, the physical world. When I was watching it with my mother, she said, I used to have a colander like that. Did you see that ornament? So straight away we connected with the physical world. And then after Mangrove, the first one, I telephoned my aunt, and she just spoke and spoke and spoke about those times and how it fired her up and her energy. So it translated to her as well. My mom was just, you know, telling me old stories. And so what it did was it gave space to the generations to come together and talk and to value those stories, but also have a focus where both the generations had witnessed something, which was the film, and could use that almost as a platform to launch their own stories and our own experiences. And I feel that hopefully, and I think this is true, that more of the younger generation will take an interest in what happened before the modern world that they know nothing about. So much has been lost. The oral tradition is making a comeback, but unless these stories are told, they are lost. Unless they're written down, they are lost. So that's why my daughter and I are writing down the stories of those times. And as a child, I kept a diary from about the age of 11. I still keep a diary now. And when I read back, I realize it's not my history, it's a history of the times and other people's history that I'm the caretaker of. Whereas when I was writing it, I never thought of it like that. It was just me writing. So we all can nurture that history. And I know that lots of young people feel that they don't have an opportunity to connect with the previous generations, because we're not only, whether they're alive or not, we live such separate lives. And I feel that the older generation sometimes feel that they're not heard or valued. So across the board, whatever your background is, it's just something to treasure, because once it's gone, it's gone. those voices are gone, but they needn't. There's still people alive today who want to share those stories.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Pippa. Thank you, Joy. As we come towards the end of this conversation, we have a fitting question about the ending of Red, White, and Blue, and I wonder if Jonathan would like to ask that on camera.
Yeah, hi, Joy.
Hello, Jonathan. Lovely to see you.
Always. Yeah, and I've enjoyed all 3 films. Me and Callum have enjoyed all 3 films. Been brilliant.
Thank you for all of your support. You've been very supportive, so thank you.
Yeah, no, and thanks for all the links you sent through, which I have tweeted on. And yesterday I watched the Hard Talk one, which was great. Yeah, my question was going to be why I kept waiting the film for the story to be told, and it never was. It just ended because I saw the whole story about him being amazing, that he was just falsely accused by his own organisation of claiming expenses, which is completely made up. The so-called £80 hotel bill. And the organisation spent £100,000 suing him for this false claim. And I thought, if anyone ever asked you what, for an example of institutional racism, you couldn't get a better one. Institution wasted £100,000 worth of taxpayers' money to sue one of their own members wrongly. But you sort of answered that, I think, because the film was long enough before it got anywhere close to that, and also your point about him not wanting to educate or moralize and just sort of telling a story.
Yeah.
And I partly just told all that to say that there shouldn't need to be a spoiler alert for asking about the end of this, because this was so much a prequel to the true story, which comes later about him being falsely accused and so on. But at the end, I actually wasn't sure whether what the father was saying, whether he was saying he still didn't like it, what he was doing, or if he was actually finally coming to terms with it, with this funny story about a grave digger. If they've got no education, that's just what they do, and if they've got education, it's and so obviously he was choosing it, and so I guess that was the father coming to terms with it, was it?
Well, what I gather from what I've read, because it's only after the working on it that I've been reading up about Leroy Logan and all that, was that it was a long journey before his father came to terms with it, and this is just the steps. So it was I believe that the film was looking at that time just before that decision was made to join the police force, how the family and the institution of coped, how Leroy coped, and it was a personal story. And at the end, where they're sitting together drinking, we hadn't really seen that before, them together, and it was just another step towards the father and the son getting a understanding and coming together, but not being able to fully get there yet. So it's a kind of an open-ended thing, and I think if the rest of the story was told, it would tie it up neatly and somehow undervalue what the earlier journey is, because it could be, oh, he was okay in the end, but he wasn't. It actually got worse at times, and the humiliation and the loneliness of when you are going through something so painful and you just feel so exposed. And one thing I will say, and I think I said it earlier about Red, White, and Blue, was the loneliness in it that struck me. The loneliness of the father when he was, well, I won't say what happened, but he was alone in his experience, the loneliness of Leroy, the loneliness of the mother, the sister, the wife, and that isolation in different ways. But what I also admired was the police weren't demonized. You had a variety of attitudes, but one thing that happened in Mangrove as well is that when you get a situation that you don't agree with, but you feel that you don't have the power to change it or even to speak up about it, you're forced to be complicit. And therein lies the taking away of our power, of our agency through fear, where we are silent.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Joy. Joy, we just have 2 minutes left, but I do want to ask a final question to you before we let you be, although it's very hard. We would want a longer evening with you, and a true evening would have been had we been able to talk a bit more over dinner. But
that would have been so lovely.
Time, and we'll get to do that. But my final question to you is, what are you working on currently? What are you looking for as an artist going forward in your work, and what should we be looking forward to from you?
Thank you, Shreya. That's such a special question for me, because my dream, my passion has always been to give a platform for the different disciplines, be it science, art, music, whatever it is, to come together in a creative way, and to, like when I had that exhibition at Kellogg College, where it was ritual and identity, and the power of art to help rehabilitate former child soldiers. We had a clinical child psychologist who was speaking about how she uses art to rehabilitate former child soldiers living in this country, and the charity is called Baobab, as the Baobab tree, and it's in London, and they support children from all over the world. We had an opera singer, we had a jazz singer, I did storytelling, and hopefully I would love Kellogg College to come in and to talk about the work that they do in the science or humanities or whatever. So I would love a platform where everything can be brought together, and then my paintings be the environment in which it lives. So I'm working on that.
Thank you so much, Joy. We really cannot wait to meet and collaborate and continue collaborating with you. We're so grateful for your time. Thank you so much. You enrich Kellogg College and all of our lives with your work. Thank you so much for appearing in this very momentous small series, Small Acts. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time, Joy.
Thank you, Shreya. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and it's wonderful to see you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thanks for everyone for joining. Appreciate it.
Lovely to see you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Joyce. Thanks, Shreya.
Thank you. I will do. You take care. Jeffrey,
Thank you.
take
Bye.
care. Bye, Jill.